Hello, everyone, and good evening. Twitter claims a $5 billion market loss over their Trump ban. Just more fake news. Today, I read an article on MSN.com and a couple from other sources which claim a couple of things about Twitter in the wake of their ban of Donald Trump from their platform. Namely, that Twitter stock prices took a 12-point dip, or roughly 12% of their market valuation, resulting in an approximate $5 billion market loss. What they don't say is that this loss never really occurred. MSN also states that Donald Trump's 88 million followers generated enormous publicity for this website. And we all know that that's true. It was true even during the Obama administration. However, the account was banned, according to Twitter's official statements, due to the risk of further incitement of violence, MSN reports. But what they don't report is that Twitter actually stands to gain everything from this move, while risking virtually nothing on the gamble. In fact, it isn't even a gamble, and I will explain. My name is Jason Gabriel, and you are at the edge of a wake. This is my first publicly shared video, and so I want to thank you all in advance for giving me the chance to be heard. In light of recent events, including the removal of a public health post from my Facebook page containing real documents exposing yet more hypocrisy in a certain State of the Union, and because my statements and opinions seem to be growing larger than a standard social media post, including images and videos, I feel inclined to begin sharing these items with you directly. To their credit, it could have been a technical error, but I also feel this will eliminate a lot of the bias and hatred that comes from the people who jump on social media and speak before they read, and those who insult before they've had a chance to understand. All of this in the hopes I can spread information in a meaningful way without bias and using more than common sense. Common sense with a little extra sense sprinkled on top. Okay? Don't worry. I also realize the silliness of the notion, considering the fact that increasing my exposure will definitely draw out the trolls and the haters, so I'm prepared for this. I will also warn you ahead of time that these videos will often be lengthy and highly descriptive, so watching them in sections or on your real downtime is probably your best bet, and I will do my best to divide them up. To me, nothing of value is ever brief, so today's articles serve literally only one purpose: to continue to drive us apart at a time when we are dangerously close to coming together as a nation. And I certainly don't mean because I believe in the incoming administration. Quite the opposite. But I do believe in people and have seen great things happen when we are forced to put aside our differences. I know what you're thinking, especially the ones on the right, that the Twitter devaluation is a good thing, that they are getting what they deserve, and that this punishment is likely to continue into the foreseeable future. The left is up in arms and flocking to Twitter's aid as they are uplifted by the social media giants' actions. Not only are they uplifted by Twitter's actions, but the actions of the platforms which offer Twitter to the public, such as Apple and Google, who have just suspended Parler, a competing social media company who stands to grow drastically as a free speech platform at a time when all of the social media giants are systematically censoring their customers. And now, to make matters worse, Amazon has pulled Parler from its servers, so essentially its growth has been completely stifled by its monopolistic competitors. And of course, YouTube has now also pulled the president's message from their platform. I'm here to tell you the truth of the matter as I reconcile a few facts for you. Businesses and individuals often disguise strategic business decisions with controversial and virtuous actions. But, in my opinion, this stock devaluation is no accident, and it amounts to potential insider trading and quite possibly antitrust laws being broken. Meaning, of course, that Twitter, and Facebook by extension, have used their monopoly over social media industries to directly control the market and shut down legitimate competitors. Skipping over, of course, the implications for violating protections of free speech given to us by our nation's Constitution. Okay. First, we have to understand what happened and why Twitter would think that these decisions would have a guaranteed outcome. Recognizing that Twitter is a massive business owned by an even more massive business is our first key to understanding what has happened. Companies of this magnitude do not make mistakes. Disney CEO does not make public statements without having those statements vetted and without gauging the response of the stockholders, and of course not without understanding how these statements will affect their customers. Don't let the actions of Donald Trump fool you. And yes, social media will tell you differently, but the posts you read on social media can and are scheduled and manipulated and often added by persons other than the account holders. And so this takes a little bit of planning. Now, I'm going to lose some of you here, but you need to wrap your head around this concept because it isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a fact that these multinational conglomerates and big businesses have think tanks and whole teams dedicated to analyzing strategies and understanding the outcomes. Think tanks are much more common than you realize, so they go by other designs, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Even the show Shark Tank is a reverse-engineered think tank where business-minded people gather to analyze potential investments. It was just adapted to be entertaining. One man can be a think tank under the correct conditions and with the appropriate support, and not everyone in a think tank has to think. There are resource specialists and managers to carry out and delegate tasks to other groups if need be, subcontracting out the think tank's ideas. Companies like FedEx and UPS, they employ hundreds of these individuals and groups. Okay, some as permanent employees and some through subcontracting. And often they offer them ownership shares in their own work in order to maintain the best quality personnel and also to maintain the secrecy of the projects. These people don't just streamline the company's inner workings, but they mesh those inner workings with the exterior forces that govern them in order to create a product vastly superior to the ones that these companies are founded with. Analytics is literally a $1 trillion industry that the population sleeps on because it all happens in private and the findings are heavily guarded in order to ensure the success of their enterprises. If you don't believe that, relegate it into a simpler comparison and just look into privacy. Look into the privacy policies for movie stars. These policies are intense and thorough, and if you break them, your career isn't just over. Okay? You will be sued to cover their losses. And a lot of these tech giants make significantly more than movie studios. So you do the math. When a company of Twitter's magnitude, owned by an even larger company, Facebook, makes a decision and also decides to put their CEO's face on it as a stamp of approval, they have thought of every outcome and they are certain of their victory. Okay? Certain to the tune of billions of dollars. And when you place a bet that large, you damn well better be sure, huh? What this means in the stock market goes far beyond what the news is reporting. Let me paint you a picture. Twitter analyzes the current economic climate and learns a couple of things. Companies who stand upright for one political agenda or another are likely to incur one of two results. First, that they could be boycotted. And second, they could be uplifted and strengthened by their client base. The first result, the boycott, is highly unlikely. Individuals will argue this point all day. But there is no example within big business today of a successful boycott. Small business, yes. Big business, no. And some of the businesses which appear to be large, like Yeti, are just small businesses. They have several key cases to support this theory, such as Uncle Ben's and Aunt Jemima, who took small but meaningful hits from the cancellation crowd, but not necessarily financial hits. These cancellation attempts were of course ridiculous, but many companies across the nation have entered into rebranding campaigns as a result, like Land O'Lakes. This is because fear is as strong as the dollar and even maybe stronger. Then you have Goya, who turned their cancellation into a stock increase by leaning into the cancellation, which placated the demographic most likely to hold them above water during this time of frustration, okay? Which of course is whoever opposes the cancellation on the grandest scale, in this case, by the political motivation of Trump supporters. Now I know Uncle Ben and Goya are old news, But these are fresh examples that companies like Twitter have to work with, and would definitely have been a part of not only the conversation that took place in the boardroom, but also a part of the decision to face the cancel crowd head on. So, with the chance of being successfully boycotted so low historically, they then only have to look to their client base to gauge their reaction to this move. This is harder to do for smaller companies, but because of their backing by Facebook and big tech, they have access to databases of information that span over the entire industry, and not just their own data from their own servers, which is still pretty young for making these types of determinations. They would have learned exactly how many accounts they stood to lose by gauging the account losses of Facebook each time Facebook censors a major client. It is important to understand this because Twitter absolutely wants to be as big as Facebook regardless of its fealty to Zuckerberg, because that is the goal of all big business, to get bigger. They also would have conducted studies performed by algorithms, more than likely, which they would have developed themselves or pay to have developed. Remembering, of course, that these companies employ the best coding specialists in the world, for which algorithms are God, and whose cleverness with technology likely means we would never find any information regarding a broken law or a breach of security, unless it suited them. So, it would not have taken very long to achieve this study. They could also write an algorithm to determine who they would likely not lose under various circumstances, determining the difference between loudmouths and potential actors by analyzing your data. Do you have a lot of photos in public? Have you attended rallies or protests? What color are your eyes? All these things, and quite literally everything about you is floating in these gigantic databases, including your search histories and your purchases. Have you bought one or more firearms online? Ammunition? What types of books do you read? All of these things will have been assigned a value within the algorithm, and the solutions will be categorized as the big tech companies see fit in order to literally answer questions they might have about you. They will have had checked these algorithms against an appropriate number of accounts in order to determine the margin for error and adjust the algorithms until they have it locked in, to an acceptable range. At that point, they begin implementing it immediately. Again, for you conspiracy theorists, this is not your home, okay? This is not a conspiracy. This is how businesses operate today and will continue to operate for the foreseeable future. More and more invasively as more companies compete for your information. So it is an absolute correct assertion to say that Twitter knew within whatever margin of error is acceptable to them or Facebook exactly what they were doing, and they will have had planned this accordingly and definitely ahead of scheduling the release of their position and implementing the ban on Trump. One last confirming piece of information regarding the client base, which is super important, would have been the election in November. The election result, no matter how controversial, would have been a giant sample from which to gauge the demographic split. If Trump had won, or if his vote count had, say, been within a few thousand votes instead of a few 100,000 votes, then the algorithm would have been less reliable. But with a large enough gap in votes, and with the understanding that the majority of people claiming they would leave a platform are generally not trustworthy due to the fact that people tend to value entertainment over their own morals. Twitter could make the assertion that the election is a viable proof of that demographic split. They could also determine the difference, they could also determine the different moments where issuing this ban would be most effective by studying previous presidential schedules and determining likely event timeframes. And then just literally exercise patience and wait for a top 10 moment to hit. Okay? In this case, even though Trump did not call specifically for violence in his message on Rally Day, they used something we used to do in the Army when we didn't like a soldier, and we would nail them with what is called patterns of misconduct. Many leaders, and definitely not myself, but many poor leaders, would even set up situations of stress and hardship to attempt to break down the soldier, forcing them to make a mistake so that they can build a case against them. As a chapter NCO, I refuse these types of measures and always encourage rehabilitation, for which I can name multiple individuals who could back this claim, but once certain leadership gets its claws into you, it can be near impossible to find your way back. This classic technique of combining frustration, physical discomfort, and blatant contempt for an individual who has done very little to genuinely nothing wrong, who has made every attempt to rehabilitate and do their job only to be blocked by leadership who is usually above their daily supervisors and who have no idea who this person is and what they do for their country on a daily basis, or who genuinely don't care because at some point leadership becomes a numbers game. Only we don't have algorithms. We have individuals making choices outside of the regulations and outside of common decency. Some of you will relate this concept to the legislature the last year, who blatantly defied its own rules and even rewrote their own rules in order to impeach Donald Trump. It's not a support of Trump, that's a fact of the legislature on both sides. So we have pretty much confirmation that Twitter has every reason to believe that condemning Trump at the correct time will be supported by the majority of their clientele, or that the combination of those who support the ban, those who don't care, and those who will remain regardless is substantial enough to support the move. We have big tech controlling the flow of information to the people of this country, and even media outlets are going hard in the paint, censoring, shutting down conservative news sources. And we have a major monopoly defended by a majority of the population within an acceptable margin of error. At this point, I'd like to thank you for sticking with me. Now, this is a natural stopping point, so we'll pause here so you guys can get a break, and then we'll continue with some market information. Okay, so after that first spiel, then we have to look at what actually happened in the market versus what the public opinion of what happened in the market really is. And that is important because both help to create that company valuation and therefore set the stock price. It is plain to see the dividing line in this area. We don't need a lot of evidence to back the claims being made here. By canceling conservative groups, posts, and banning Trump, Twitter effectively alienated a specific demographic, whether it's right or wrong. Like Goya, but much more invasive, by both creating their own cancellation policy and also leaning into their cancellation. Okay, it's clever. All right. By doing this, Twitter can achieve great and terrible things. They can both reduce the number of undesirable stockholders and sell those shares to more desirable stockholders at a fraction of the price, meaning that those more desirable stockholders can purchase even more stock. This creates a vacuum effect where share values are not an accurate depiction of the actual value of the company, who actually has not lost a dime yet because of angel investments, bank guarantees, and the like that allow large companies to dabble in things like futures with some insurance. They would have had those meetings and come to those agreements long before Twitter initiated the ban. This is too big of a dip to control on the fly. Okay? In reality, Twitter has not had the time to be affected by their Trump ban. It can take weeks, months, years to see any real effect, okay, due to the fact that companies this big will have investors lined up to get a piece of that pie constantly. Twitter and Facebook can also scoop up or issue more stock and play with the valuation, selling them directly to investors outside of regular market conditions. And individuals employed by this company can do the same. And they are. It's just a fact. Smart employees working for large corporations tend to invest in those corporations at viable points. You work at Mickey D's for 20 years, you take the stock options, okay? As long as the company doesn't publicly announce its recommendation to purchase more stock, they can't really be hit with insider trading violations. And we can assume that the very intelligent people working for these high-end tech companies will understand the economic climate and act accordingly. Public opinion, however, is split. Both sides believe that a real devaluation took place, which is incorrect. But what's important is they are split on what that actually means for the company. As I stated, they're both wrong in this regard as well. The right thinks that it is a well-deserved punishment, and the left believes that it is an attack on Twitter. We won't go into the free speech implications because that has very little to do with the actions taken here. And as far as an attack on Twitter is concerned, it is absolutely the right of any individual to cease its use of any product for any reason. We are talking about civilian citizens. You can think what you want, say what you want, and pretty much do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't harm someone else physically. And in many cases, that's even allowed by law. That's why we have excise taxes. All of the semantics surrounding free speech are a veil for the standard corrupt business practices occurring. But neither side is letting go of its stance, that this is either a violation of free speech or it is an attack on people who feel they are being physically threatened, or will be someday by some Trump supporter. You're more likely to die in a car crash than to get attacked by your standard Trumper. It's just statistics. So we have a ripe market condition from a healthy stock market, even during the pandemic. We have stock manipulation and consumer manipulation to the tune of free speech and public health fear-mongering. And we have a well-timed trauma to spark things off. Note that it has only been a couple of days and Twitter already claims to have regained much of the market valuation it lost. This would have required investments far above its projected losses because of the 12% dip. All Twitter has to do now is play the waiting game. Also, because of the deflated price, once they do hit that $5 billion investment, they will have sold at a minimum 12% more shares. Okay, so once they hit that $5 billion investment, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And because of the nature of the dip and the very short time frame, this is something they can do very easily. Social media platforms are already growing at a rate of 16.8% per annum, according to the latest IBIS world projection reported by PR Newswire. Okay, so this wager Twitter has made was in no way a gamble. They are the casino, and we all know the house always wins. All they have to do is stay open. I mean, I do the math for you, but I've been up all night, and what we are looking at is very complicated, as I said. But the best way to think about it would simply be to divide the 16.8% average by 12 to get you a month, right? 1.4%. By selling more shares to achieve the same value and then normalizing your value to boost stock prices, they will easily recover that 12% back, having more money in the process, easily surpassing that 1.4%. You can guess anywhere up to 12%, which means they will have made almost an entire, they have the potential to make almost an entire year's profits from 1 month, which means they will almost double the national average, or they have the potential to. This will be a record year for Twitter. I would say this may require lifting bans and easing restrictions, but all signs tell me this is probably unnecessary. People will use this platform regardless of how they claim to feel about these situations. Okay? And friends, at this point, I'll describe what this really means for us, and we will conclude. If you need to grab some water, go ahead. All right. Spiel after spiel, but I promise you we are working towards our conclusion, and I thank you for your patience. And finally, what we come to realize is that even though this free speech conflict and public safety conflict are not something I will be able to dissuade with my commentary, there are some real implications for the near future. Most importantly, it only serves to divide us further. I mean, when I say we are closer to peace than ever, I truly mean it. I mean, this just requires some development of the thought process and some admission of failure on the part of the American people. We, the people, let the situation get out of hand, not by not holding our government leaders accountable for their actions or lack thereof. We, the people, have let the tech companies have access and control over our private information. And of course, we, the people, have stood by while radicals and terrorists, foreign and domestic, have attacked our cities and our citizens. I have criticized individuals for standing up for what they believe in when it was plain to me that they believed without merit, evidence, or value. And yes, I've gotten into heated debates over social media. But if you go back far enough, you will realize that I've argued both sides of the coin. During school and after graduation in social work, I did my best to understand both sides because that is what I was taught by good leaders in the Army. And because I wanted to work in legislation, and as a white man in the black community who has lived in nothing but low-income situations his entire life, except for a few short years under Trump where I was very successful, it is important to understand how people feel before you can enter into a situation where you can help them. And that is all people. Okay, I'm here for all people, and especially those who want a real connection to a real solution. Many mistake my support of certain situations as a love for Trump, and I can assure you that isn't the case. I feel sorry for him. That's my stance. And when you feel sorry for someone and you are a good person, you'll stick up for that person even when they're being a moron. Before he ran for presidency, though, I mean, everyone thought he was an asshole, but he was an asshole that was loved. I mean, he was rich and famous, and we bought his books and watched his TV shows, not me personally. People read his books and claimed to gain knowledge. But he made the same mistake that Obama did, and this is but one of the reasons why they both failed us. I mean, nobody even really knew who Obama was before he ran for president. Obama, the first African-American president whom we revered and loved, and many still do, stood up in public and told another human being that they would never be president. A beacon of achievement stood in front of the world and degraded another human being. Nobel Peace Prize winner telling another human being that they are better than them. Let that sink in, okay? And then we have Trump, who, like many short-term memory politicians, stood in front of the world and told the American people that they will never be socialists. Well, gentle persons, the world has a habit of proving people wrong. And so, in the words of William Shakespeare, all are punished. And that is where we are today. We have been divided not just by our own failed thought processes and our own failed agendas, but we have been and are being divided still. Case in point, the new administration, as it is being reported by the media, has basically chosen its entire cabinet based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. Nowhere in the mainstream media are their qualifications being discussed and confirmed. I'm sure it will probably pop eventually, but everyone is just happy they aren't old white men, forgetting the fact that they chose an old white men to choose these people for them. Now, frankly, I don't give a damn what their race, gender, and sexual orientation is, and certainly not because I'm a white man. I want people who are going to do their job and do it well. And when you broadcast these ideals that factors external to performance are what is key, you too are alienating the people. I've said this for a while, but it's kind of hard to explain. A lot of people just want to be represented by their government. And a lot of people think that means the person holding office should look and sound like them. At first, this seems like a pretty solid concept. Avoid underrepresentation wherever possible. But our system of government was not designed for this. Our system of government was designed for representatives from all over the major geographic locations to formulate laws for their individual locations separately, and then come together and develop the laws for the entire nation. At no point does the Constitution state that you should and will be represented by a person who looks and talks like you. This is a common mistake in reasoning, and I will explain a little bit more. If it's in the Constitution, I missed it, and it certainly has not been adhered to. And of course, you did not hear me say that this is correct in any way. I am simply explaining the limitations of the founding documents. What is problematic about sticking to this idea is that it is impossible. We choose but a few individuals to represent many, and those few could never represent every constituent. When you say 2 to 5 people or thereabout shall represent the entire geographic location of land X, you are forcing the people to choose between their hearts and their minds. Additionally, like this cabinet, there is no way you could ever know that the one individual who looks and talks like you also thinks and will act as you would act. That would assume that every single brown person thinks and acts alike, and every single white person thinks and acts alike, and this is true systemic racism that is being concealed from us while they push us against one another in daily conflict and hold us apart when we love and care for one another. What we need is both complicated and simple. It is democratic and it is Republican, and yes, it is socialist. Each in varying degrees and each checked by the others. This can certainly be achieved without becoming China or some of our less fortunate socialist countries and failed states. And denying that we have socialist values entwined with our Democrat and Republican ideals is just a flat-out lie. Okay? Socialism is not efficiently controlled by a political party, however. And the reason being is because its success is not well defined, and it does not exist without first achieving an efficient democratic republic, which we have failed to do. It is simply a part of society, and it is exemplified by nearly every social welfare program we have, though exacerbated by its prevalence within our society. Okay? It should be limited and controlled. Therefore, it should not be the focus of a party or a branch of government, but rather its ideals should be included in the government in such a way that its ideals prevail and not its history. A concept adopted by the society who already relies on it. You can install a socialist measure to check the legislative process. They do this literally every time an underrepresented demographic is identified to be unfortunate. They add a measure to equalize the playing field for that demographic, often to the detriment of others, and then they call it justice. Well, that's just passing the hardships of one group onto the others, and that is not appropriate socialism. That is a socialism which kills nations. So today we have experienced some semblance of what it's like to live under socialist rule. Those who have made their fortunes in the capitalist society of the United States and installed themselves as rulers of their domains on high, both in government and as private citizens, then turn on that system in an attempt to stop me and you from achieving such heights. And that is what this quarrel is really about. Those private and public figures remaking the country in an image which will bring them wealth, power, and renown to the detriment of the people. It is not the will of the people to be ruled, but governed. The reason being because we don't trust each other, and many find good reason for such a mistrust as humans defy each other, murder each other, and abuse each other, all around the world since the dawn of our species. So, it should not be surprising to us that we failed, and I really don't think it is surprising. We expect that one of the youngest nations in the world by birthright, are correct in our governance. This is systemic ignorance. How could we have it figured out when there is no comparable example in recent history which we may compare our success against? Our country has always increased its strength through conflict, never through peace. Peace means putting down the stick, and that we simply cannot do because our country is built on war and terror. And as long as there are other violent actors in the world, the United States will necessarily remain a military power, and that will mean remaining proficient and preparing ourselves and others for war. We've just gotten really good at playing away games, fighting on other people's soil. Okay? But our base natures insist that we conflict with each other at home as well. If we can move past this, we can accomplish anything. Companies like Twitter and Facebook, however, rely on our division to produce wealth, as do many of our representatives. They involve themselves with large manufacturing companies and individuals who produce weapons of war, and of whom they often join the boards of directors once they retired from public service. This is a guarantee of wealth later for their vote on the floor today, and it is a highly effective means of lobbying. Okay, so I'm sorry to say that we have a big hill to climb, if we ever want to live up to the goal of being a free society, that is. This isn't a problem of capitalism, this is a problem of individuals. Governments, which should be analyzing these moves by big tech, are instead receiving campaign donations from them and imposing the will of those donor businesses onto the American people. The solution is plain, and we will get to it later, but today I simply wanted to touch base with you and begin the work of finding peace together. For those of you I've insulted along the way in order to gain a better understanding of the playing field, know that this was not my intention. I know that some of the more thick-skinned people will understand and forgive me. I wish you all well, and I hope that you've taken something from this. I hope even more that we can accept a peace that's viable and barring our political affiliations, and that we can exercise some common sense together. I apologize for the anticlimactic nature of this video ending, and shall endeavor to give you more flair. Regardless, I want to thank you for giving me your time, and I will be coming to you again soon with more on the state of our union. For now, thank you for walking the edge with me, and Godspeed and good night.